It is the Everton Byline, episode 10, into double figures. Here I am, Matt Jones. Joining me, as ever, is Paddy Boyland. We are a day late this week, but that's because my co-host selfishly decided to take some time off and go on holiday. Did you have a nice time, Paddy?
Had a lovely time.
Where did you go?
Felt like quite a short holiday. Just a long weekend, effectively, due to the international break. So yeah, nice to be able to do it. An international break for some journalists as well as players at times. Went up to the to northeast, to Northumberland actually. So I was expecting loads of Newcastle fans with inflatable dinosaurs on my train up on Sunday. But if the inflatable dinosaurs had travelled to Liverpool with them, that they weren't there by the time they made their way back, I think probably chucked on the pitch a little bit like they were after. Do you remember when Alex Iwobi scored?
Yeah.
And they had loads and loads of inflatable dinosaurs, and there's a video of them just throwing them all on the pitch when Iwobi scores. Maybe that kind of thing.
I just thought they always carry them around with them up there. It's like, kids take them to school and people take them to the pub and stuff like that. Just maybe like a part of their daily lives. Just every family's got to have at least one.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they kind of torn Pickford pretty mercilessly, don't they, at times? I'm sure we're going to come on at some point to talk about that and what's happened with Everton over Anthony Gordon over the past few days, and I'm sure we've got our own. Everyone's got their own thoughts on that, but pretty bizarre.
Very bizarre.
Really, pretty bizarre, really, in a whole load of ways, and just nice to see Jordan Pickford step up in that really big moment against those fans that, as we've said, taunt him mercilessly and make a big save. I mean, I don't think he's had a good start to the season by any stretch of the imagination, really. He's been super rusty and made a few obviously high profile mistakes, but one thing you can kind of always count on him is in those big moments. He just about always seems to turn up when Everton need him, and that was another example there. I said to somebody shortly after the game that I felt that Everton had burgled a point, and I still probably feel that way now. Wasn't a great performance at all, but sometimes you need to just grind it out, don't you? Sometimes you need your big players, whether it's Pickford at one end or somebody in midfield doing a really good job, or Jared Branthwaite or James Tarkov. Sometimes you need players like that to step up, and thankfully they did.
Yeah, absolutely. We will dive into that performance in a bit more detail later on. Just a few little things to start off. Just wanted to mention great news for us, Paddy, and this podcast, that we have got a new partner, a new sponsor. It is the Bridewell Pub in Liverpool. We've recorded quite a lot in there in the past, that it's great to have them on board, obviously, from the same umbrella as the Denby Castle. Great boozer, isn't it? One of the best in town. Certainly you can watch your sport in there. Great setting in regards to the old, obviously, jailhouse. Great ale selection and great people who work there. So just from both of us, it's fantastic to be working with them, and we're going to be recording a few shows in there, do some video stuff in there, obviously the audio stuff as well. But from both of our perspective, great to be in partnership with one of our favourite places to go in town.
Yeah, well, we also we had a meeting. Do you remember when we started coming up with an idea for this pod? We had one of our first meetings in the Bridewell, didn't we? So it's kind of already, there's kind of a nice, for want of a better phrase, kind of through flow there, isn't there? In those early meetings, talking about what this podcast would be and how it would fit together and all those kind of things, and coming up with, like, for example, let's talk about 3 big Everton issues that week and all that kind of stuff. That was all partly in the Bridewell.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to have them on board. If you've not been, well worth your time on a match day or otherwise. Great place to go and have a boozer for whatever you're feeling like, really. If you want to watch the footy in a quiet place, if you want to just sit outside. Maybe not so much in this weather at this time of year, but the courtyard is heated as well. Do go and check it out if you haven't already. The details of where to find them will be in the description of this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube. And the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention, our good friend Paddy Mark Mosey this week is doing the Goodison Sleep Out on Friday, I believe it is. We will include the link to sponsor Mo's in the description again for this podcast. Also check out the Blue Room's Twitter or check out his Twitter at MoseyFC. He is on there. Have you ever done it, Paddy, the Sleep Out? Have you ever been tempted to do it if you haven't?
Yeah, I definitely have been tempted to do it, but I can't claim to have done so already. Feel a bit of regret now, this being the last year at Goodison. I mean, it was a very worthwhile cause, and that's the most important thing of all. So to good on Mosey for doing it, but just also I think gives you it must give you a very unique perspective of Goodison at night, particularly when very few fans there at all. So I've always wanted to, never quite got around to it, and I'll be honest, you just got to hope for them on the weather's. The weather's okay. Wrap up warm, you've got your layers, because it's been dreadful for quite a while. The weather, hasn't it? You don't want to be kind of there with it, kind of rain and wind and cold and all that kind of stuff. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for them all.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we've got quite a few people doing it. But yeah, I think Mosey in particular is someone who likes his comfort. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on sleeping on his maybe his own plastic seat in the park end. But yeah, if you want to give Mose a sponsor, the link to do so will be in the description of this podcast. Like I said, you can find it on Twitter as well. And just finally, if you're watching us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe, do comment on all the topics we're talking about today. And listeners on iTunes or Spotify, leave us a rating, leave us a review. It all helps. And yeah, tell your mates if you're enjoying the podcast and looking for stuff to listen to from an Everton point of view. All this stuff helps. Right, admin done. Paddy, let's get into the topics. 0-0 at the weekend, but not short of instant by any means. There's only one place to start, and it's Anthony Gordon and that penalty and the fallout. And I think actually where they want to kind of begin this is with how the players reacted to the penalty miss, and certainly most notably Abdoulaye Doucouré, who went full Martin Keown in the afterwards. And listen, I know he's trying to celebrate with Jordan Pickford, but I think it's probably fair to say he knew that he was invading Gordon's personal space, to put it politely. And I think that in particular to me sort of buys into or shows maybe some of the true feeling around Gordon, and ties into the tweet Everton put out, and certainly the animosity from the fans, because it feels as though players can leave, and afterwards, I'm sure that you saw Jordan Pickford talking quite amicably with him after the game. But rarely do you see that kind of animosity, you think, to a former player from his old teammates. And it does sort of feel as though not only is there some edge there from the supporters, clearly at the football club as well, with the statement they put out when he left, and obviously the very tame tweet, admittedly, they put out after the game. But in that Everton dressing room as well, it still feels like there's a bit of ill feeling towards him for the way it all went down.
Yeah, definitely a notable reaction, as you say, from Doucouré. And like you, can only come to the conclusion that he was attempting to effectively celebrate in front of Anthony Gordon. Jordan Pickford obviously did, but I think it's a little bit different for Pickford. He's an international teammate of Anthony Gordon's, isn't he? And he needs to kind of keep those relationships intact. Most of that England squad will be quite pally. So you'll have a few different dynamics within the Everton squad, and probably a few different feelings towards Anthony Gordon. It's always hard to know how much of this is traced back to past events, and in particular the nature of what was obviously quite an acrimonious departure when he left. Clear that there's a bit of bad blood on both sides. I mean, I know whether it's true or not, Gordon's can feel that he was kind of a bit unfairly scapegoated, and would have liked to have seen a little bit more from Everton in their statement when he left, given that he was sold for big money. He played for the club in a difficult period as an academy graduate as well, and was involved. I think he probably takes more credit for Everton's surviving relegation than most of us would give him, but that would be their argument, that he was involved in those teams quite heavily and in staying up. I do think that money was really pivotal. I think that's worth stressing, by the way. That money, that 40-odd million pound, helped keep the lights on. Even though Everton obviously went on to fail PSR, if they'd breached by even more without that sale, then they'd have got a bigger points deduction, in theory, given some of the explanations from tribunals over the last 12 months or so. And I also think it was a club working across purposes, where there was a lot of anger and annoyance, frustration at Finch Farm at him not turning up and him not wanting to be part of games in that period. I think there was a game against West Ham where he didn't travel and didn't want to travel. And people on the ground on Merseyside were like, well, where is he? Why is he disrespecting us like this? And that came through in a lot of the communications, obviously, to fans, to journalists, in the statement when he eventually left. And it would be very easy for players to buy into that a little bit too. Where it gets complicated, of course, is that actually sometimes he was missing training to be with the Everton owner, Farhad Moshiri, in London, and Moshiri's various representatives, including Kia Jarabchin, who's on the paperwork on the Newcastle side of the deal. Which is curious as well, by the way, because they've got their own people. Like, they had Dan Ashworth in place at the time who could negotiate that.
Sorry, Paddy, just interesting what you said there. So would you say it's more a case of he was missing training at the time for that kind of reason, as opposed to going on strike? Because I think there's obviously a line out there, isn't it? That I've seen it a lot in the days after this game, that Gordon went on strike at Everton effectively to force through the move. Didn't want to train. Is that kind of a bit wide of the mark from your understanding?
No, I just think there's a bit more nuance in the situation. I think there's two very distinct narratives, and one is from his side. I was allowed to be there with the owner, and it was poorly communicated to people on Merseyside. And there's definitely an element of that, absolutely. But there's also another side of this where he did decide that he didn't want to go to West Ham and so on and so forth. So, as ever in these situations, there tends to be a shade of grey in the middle, doesn't there? And what I would say is that it obviously shines a light on what was a disconnect, and something we've spoken about at great length, that disconnect between the very top of the club and maybe just about everybody underneath, where they're working a bit cross purposes. Gordon's not turned up to train and nobody kind of really knows why, but he's in London negotiating his exit with Farhad Moshiri. All pretty messy and symptomatic of a club at that time that had its wires crossed. So there is nuance here. I wouldn't completely absolve him of any of it. And it's also hard to know, of course, how some of the stuff he's done since he left has also helped to fuel some of the animosity. I mean, everyone's seen images of him after, I think it was a 4-1 win for Newcastle, celebrating in the tunnel and then in the changing room. He's in the team photo, those kind of quite funny team photos they do after wins, where everybody's in them, and kind of celebrating
Jason Tindall in the middle.
With Jason Tindall always the bronze central piece of the whole thing. Bizarre, but I mean, he kind of very active participant in all of that, Anthony Gordon, and that'll just annoy people, won't it? Inside and outside the club, I guess. If you care about the club and you want it to do well, then you probably can't celebrate a victory against them. Such an important victory at that point, when it looked like Everton's Premier League future is in the balance from that point. You can't celebrate quite that much. So, not entirely surprised with all of this. Maybe a little bit by the extent of Doucouré's celebration and the way he was right in front of Gordon, to the point where he effectively brushes past him, doesn't he? Maybe a little bit surprised by that. But in general, I think this is more about Gordon v the fan base. This is a local lad who has spurned the club he came through, or that's certainly the common feeling here, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've found quite a lot of it since pretty mad. It almost feels like everybody's heads have collectively fallen off. Certainly at that tweet from Everton. I mean, I don't know what you made of that, but I can't believe what I've seen since.
Just going back to like the exit and stuff. Like, do you know what? Like the stuff like from the 4-1, which he did, like being in the photo and like giving it the fist pump, like that doesn't really bother me at all. Because I suppose, like trying to put myself in his position, they were going for the Champions League at that point, weren't they? Like it was a big atmosphere, big night. They came and battered us. Like it was a big win for them. Like I get it. Like maybe he shouldn't have done the double fist pump right in front of the camera. That might have been maybe a little bit much, but he's celebrating a big win for his team. Like so what? It's the stuff that happened when he left, and obviously said there's nuance in regards to missing training, but not going to West Ham at a time when, you know, Lampard was under huge pressure. Lampard had been a huge figure in him developing as a player. Like that feels like wrong. And I imagine that's probably what would have upset the players in the dressing room at that point as well, when everybody is, you know, on the knees in desperate need of points, in desperate need of a result, and he decides not to play. Because it sounds like, it sounds almost certain that it's not as if the transfer wouldn't have gone through, because Everton were desperate at that point to recoup that money and be able to spend, to be able to get closer to that PSR threshold. And I mean, if that transfer hadn't have gone through, they would have been 40 million less, wouldn't they, on that as well? Yeah. And God knows how severely they would have been punished then. So obviously that deal would have gone through. And maybe from his point of view, he'd say, I don't want to get injured and jeopardize the move, whatever. But I feel like at that point, to not go and play at West Ham, that's the thing that rankles me and makes me a little bit more annoyed. But
I understand it completely, and maybe, as you say, that was the feeling from some that were in the situation at the time, playing in a very difficult set of circumstances. Obviously,
Corey wasn't playing weirdly, was he?
No, he was completely.
He was being excluded by Lampard, so that's a bit of a mad situation as well.
Yeah, he was kind of ostracised, wasn't he? At that point, he wasn't in the squad playing games, and I actually think he'd have probably left that January as well. Well, he said that to me in an interview. Decore had Lampard stayed in charge. Obviously, the West Ham game ends up being quite important, doesn't it? Because you've got loads of key figures from Everton at the game, including Farham Mashiri, and then he's sacked pretty soon after that. Also got this bizarre dynamic where Arno Danjuma is in Everton gear at Finch Farm, watching that game unfold in real time. They should have just blanked all the screens. It should have been, don't show them how bad we actually are.
Put an old West Ham game on. If you sat there like, isn't this Upton Park? What's
Leighton Baines is 2 free kicks. It's like, am I going to be playing with this lad at left back? So I think the really interesting thing in all of this to me is that for all the talk on Gordon's side about mindset and mentality, and certainly in terms of his end product, he seems to have come on quite significantly over the last year. What was it, kind of around 20 goal involvements last year? Something I probably didn't think he was capable of so early into his career and so soon after leaving Everton. For all that, he didn't look like a player completely in control of his decision-making process and seemed to be affected by playing at Goodison, I felt, again. And it's not just the penalty, by the way. He's a very good penalty taker normally, and that was not a good penalty. But I think he was on the penalty. He was kind of playing up a bit, wasn't he? It was that clip of him. I'll take it, with the confident grin on his face and wanting to kind of play with Pickford, showing him where he was going to go, and all this double bluffing. I think when you get into that kind of mindset, you're not actually focused on your process, are you? Like his meditation, if he wants to call it that, will probably tell him to stay focused, not to get involved in any of the outside, the external stuff. Concentrate on the ball, concentrate where you're going to put it, and visualizing all that, executing it. He didn't do that in that moment. He seemed to be somewhere else, and maybe that was Everton. Maybe that was this against Everton at the Gladys Street, and this is a big moment for me, and I want to take control there. I also think there's a moment. There are a couple of other bizarre decisions. There's one in the first half where he's free to meet a cross in the 6-yard box, and it's a great chance if he heads it towards goal, but he puts it back towards Joe Linton, and Joe Linton kind of scuffs it over. There's another one in the second half where he slipped in by Almiron down the right of the box, And he's got 3 or 4 options that are better than the one he takes, where he just balloons it over the bar, really. Strikes it as hard as possible at Pickford and it goes over the bar. He could aim for the far corner, low and hard drilled. I think Joe Linton actually is on the other side of the box for a slid ball across. And for now, at least, probably not reading too much in this to say that he did seem to be affected by coming back to Goodison. There is still an issue there for him. So we can talk all we want about there being an issue on the Everton side, and Everton fans don't like him and all this kind of stuff, which obviously we've had from elsewhere. But I think he's still impacted by this. His head is still, to some extent, focused on this stuff, and I think that tells you everything. I think there's bad blood on both sides that probably still to be resolved and may never be resolved.
Yeah, and like that's why like I think the tweet is such a minor thing, because like I don't think even he will be bothered about it. Like it's the sort of thing that, you know, if he is as strong mentally as he speaks about openly, I'm sure he is. Like you said, he's come through at Newcastle, done really well. He's in the England squad, all these sorts of things. Like he's really come on there. Like I can't imagine he's going to be that arsed about it, like at all. And it's such a tame thing, and I think you're right that the power clutching over it, I think, in the aftermath has been quite staggering for me. And I think people maybe have got a bit of an old school warped view about what official accounts, certainly on Twitter, like are about now. Like they're not there to post official statements and sponsorship updates and, you know, sanitized, matter of fact match reports. That they have personalities of their own. Like that's the world that we're living in now. If you want to read a match report that just goes, you know, in minute 1 this happened, in minute 2 this happened, there's official sites, there's national newspapers, there's all these other outlets for it. You know, social media is a bit fun now. There is going to be the occasional little gag on there. Like that's just how it is. So
I think particularly, Matt, TikTok. I think that's like, TikTok is quite piss takey at times, isn't it? Yeah. And you see a lot of clubs doing things like that on social media.
Probably much worse and much more like inflammatory than what like miles more inflammatory than what Everton put out to the weekend.
Yeah, I think it was jokey, and look, it's not gonna work for everybody. Some people will want the club communications across all formats to be quite run of the mill, quite perfunctory, and that will be one argument here. I didn't particularly have a huge problem with it, but I can see why it's blown up, because there's such a combustible atmosphere around this anyway, and relationships between the two sets of fans aren't great, as we know. Everton are not the only ones doing that kind of content. Certainly not on TikTok and then to an extent on Twitter. I actually don't think it blows up if it doesn't go on Twitter, by the way. I think it's just because it's been brought to a different audience, and other people now have seen it, including kind of other people in the media and pundits, and that's kind of helped it explode a little bit. I suppose the question we have to ask here, with this kind of content, is there a danger that it oversteps a line, that it goes across a line, that it becomes, let's say, for example, abusive or could lead to abuse? And I don't think it is abusive, really. I think it's quite jokey. I think it's quite tame. And it's certainly not as bad as, admittedly not from a club account, but it's certainly not as bad as what Jordan Pickford was getting during the game from people in the away end. Certainly not as bad as that. And I think it's quite interesting, actually, that so much of the fallout since has focused on Everton's treatment of Gordon compared to the abuse Pickford gets whenever he plays against Newcastle. And there'll obviously be some people that were in the away end chanting that stuff at Pickford that are now furious at Everton putting a buzzer sound over Anthony Gordon missing a penalty.
Or Jordan Pickford saving a penalty. Like that's the other way to look at it. Like this could easily be as much Everton championing their goalkeeper making a penalty save, and like, using that sound effect to sort of say, like, nah, you're not getting past me, as it is to say, Anthony Gordon, nah, you've not scored. Like, listen, I know there's again, the shades of grey and all this, but Everton should be able to kind of celebrate their keeper. Like, yeah, I don't think it's gone anywhere near the line that you've got to cross. And I know Anthony Gordon recently has like donated stuff to Everton to help like raise money for charity and stuff like that. Like, I don't think it's got anywhere near that line where they would be completely like destroy any kind of tiny bit of goodwill there that exists between Gordon and maybe some people at the football club still. So with that in mind, like I think Gordon himself, listen, he's a Scouser. He's come through He's come through this city. He knows what football rivalry is about. People like to have a little dig at each other every now and then. I don't think he's going to be arsed. And I think maybe it's one of them we just need to move on from now, and we will do the same. Sorry, go on. You've got one more thing to do.
Yeah, I think if any one act by Everton Football Club has had an impact on Anthony Gordon, I think it's more likely to be the statement they put out when he left, where he wasn't thanked, and has since brought up the fact that he wasn't thanked. And I mean, it was obviously a very short and blunt statement, and we've gone into a few of the reasons why already on this podcast, haven't we? I think that's more of a thing than buzzer sounds on saved penalties. I think probably just need to grow up.
Yeah, there we go. A great way to finish that segment, certainly, mate. Two more points we'll talk through. We won't go on as long about these as we did at the last one, I'll assure everybody. But last night, Paddy, when we were deciding what topics to talk about, Howard Webb and Michael Owen in that riveting show they do called Mic'd Up, which is must-watch television, you got to say. Went through the audio from the VAR for the penalty at the weekend. And it was quite interesting. I think it kind of confirmed, it kind of went exactly how I expected. But I think the interesting thing for me, a couple of things on it really. I think Craig Pawson says straight away, no, not for me. When I think in real time, I feel like everybody just thought it was Stonewall. It looked Stonewall penalty, but he immediately said no. And I think the other thing as well was sort of how quickly they dismissed it as a foul potentially by Calvert-Lewin on Dan Burn, because I think it's like I've watched it a lot over the past few days, and listen, I'm not a qualified referee, don't work for the Premier League, so maybe I'm not going to see these things as well as them and as quickly as them. But I was surprised by how quickly they kind of dismissed it, because it feels like one of them which has been forensically analysed a lot over the past few days. And people are still trying to find a way to come to a conclusion on it, and I'm not quite sure either way. Maybe felt like it deserved a bit of a longer look from the officials, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably done in about 30 seconds, wasn't it?
Yeah.
From the point at which Pawson first said, no, not for me, to the VAR and the assistant VAR kind of rubber stamping the initial decision. I do think there's an element of confirmation bias here. I think if you're an assistant VAR or a VAR and you are hearing the on-pitch referee saying, I don't think this is a penalty, I think you almost, whether conscious or not, looking to justify the original decision. I was surprised by how short that process was. And I suppose what they would say in response is that you want this to be short. You don't want 4 3-minute checks. You wanted it to be quicker and more streamlined. But I think this was too short, in my opinion. And actually, you look at the replays they showed, it was 1 or 2. It certainly wasn't the close-up, another close-up I'd seen where Dan Burn actually catches Calvert-Lewin's ankle with his follow-through. Didn't seem like maybe enough evidence there. And I think the other thing we need to establish is where's the line for, I suppose, a player stepping across and impeding versus the opposition player just kicking them. I mean, like, for me, one of the main questions should have been, it was Dan Burn going to win that ball? Who was more likely to win the second ball after the shot is saved? And I think the answer there is Calvert-Lewin. Can Dan Burn win that ball? I don't think he can. In putting his foot in front of Calvert-Lewin and stopping him getting to the ball, does that make contact between the two more likely? And again, I think the answer is yes. And is, as a result, that stopping Calvert-Lewin having what would have been a tap in on his left foot. Now, I don't take anything for granted with Everton. That might have sailed into the Gladys Street, as Idrissa Gueye's follow-up shot did, by the way. But I think in talking about Calvert-Lewin kicking Dan Burn, we're almost skirting around the issue. And if Burn puts his leg in front of Calvert-Lewin and stops him getting to the ball while having no ability to get in himself, that to me is obstruction. So, I mean, I'd said on Twitter the day after the game that I'd gone back and forth on the decision and whether it was a penalty. I'm probably more convinced now that it was a penalty than when I first saw the first few replays, to be honest. First replay I saw, I thought, no, he's kicked Dan Burn. First time I saw it in the ground, live, I thought that's a nailed-on penalty. I was like, that has to be a penalty. It just looked from where I was in the press box, in the main stand, middle of the main stand. I was closer to Calvert-Lewin than Burn. I could almost see Burn clumsily kind of jumping into him. Started to doubt it a little bit as I saw more replays. And then since then, I've kind of gone back a little bit more towards my original opinion, which was Burns never winning that ball. He stops Calvert-Lewin having a tap in. And I think that should be penalised, probably. So I do wonder how we're discussing these kind of things and whether actually we're focusing on the whole picture in just looking at the contact between Calvert-Lewin and Burn. No complaints really with I know some people have complaints with the penalty that was awarded to Newcastle. I personally think.
Oh, that was absolutely ridiculous. Like I genuinely don't know what goes through his head. Like on that one, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. But like, I think it's like I think my trajectory with it and back and forth has kind of exactly followed yours in the sense that as soon as when I first saw it, it was like that is nailed on. Then didn't think it was, and now the more I've watched it and the more I've heard people talk about it, the more I think it probably is. Like, and I think it's this idea that if you get in front of the player and they like in like a normal act, like Calvert-Lewin having a shot there is like a normal footballing act. I don't want to sound like a referee or however, but like that's a normal thing for a player in that situation to do.
It's his ball to go for, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And like it's not like he's kicked Burn to stop him getting the ball. He's trying to he's not in possession of the ball, but he's more likely to get the ball in that situation. He's probably more in control of that situation. And Burn interferes in what is like a normal thing for Dom to be doing there, which is having a shot. It's not like Burns trying to win the ball and Calvert-Lewin stuck his leg out to trip him or stop him from getting it. So it's this idea that Burn being in front of Dom sort of covers all manner of sins, which I don't really get. And I don't know what the rule is on it, but that doesn't feel right, that like you can just put yourself in front of somebody and it means that you can't foul them. Like if you're running down the side, say that's like say the Dom's got the ball on the sideline and knocks it past Burn and Burn cuts in front of him and takes him out, like that's a foul, isn't it? That gets given as a foul. And it's like it's sort of a similar thing. So I think it is a tricky one. I think that there are a lot of different things to take into account with it. I think Burns leg taking out Dom's right foot as well wasn't really noticed at the time. So maybe there's a bit of like another bit of contact there. But yeah, just going back to what we said at the start, like I was just surprised by how quick that they dismissed it. And I think your point about the confirmation bias is absolutely spot on. Like I don't know in that situation, does Craig Pawson really need to say no, not for me when he's not given the penalty? Like surely that's one of those things that just like I said, kind of re-emphasizes his point when the VAR is meant to be there to be looking at it objectively from their own point of view. So I don't know. I think it is a tricky one. I think it's just a penalty. But yeah, I don't think it's one of them that would have been overturned if it had been given. Although I've seen some people suggesting that if Garner Gay had scored afterwards, then it could have come back for a foul.
Could you imagine that?
That would have been remarkable. But yeah, frustrating because we've had a few, haven't we, this year? Obviously, Dom's had a couple, hasn't he? He spoke after the game, didn't he? And seemed a bit frustrated. I think he said, "What I don't know what I have to do to get one of these." So
Yeah.
So go on.
I mean, I think if Everton had won that game 1-0 through a penalty or through Adrisagay actually just putting the ball in the back of the net in the first place, I think that would have been daylight robbery, to be honest, because Newcastle pretty much dominated the game, had most of the main chances, apart from the one at the end for Everton. And I thought actually it was quite a poor performance from Everton. Like, lacked cohesion. So yeah, like if they'd won 1-0, I think we'd have all walked away going, yeah, that's great, but actually you didn't play very well, and we need to there's stuff here that we need to work on anyway.
Sorry. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, if you watch on YouTube, you might just mute it itself for a second there. But yeah, I think the fact that we played, we're talking about topics away from the game and away from the performance, just kind of illustrate that, don't they? Less said about the way Everton played, the better, really. We'll finish off with another off the pitch topic, mate. Obviously on Monday, we got relatively big news from the Premier League and Manchester City in regard to their legal case, with both parties kind of claiming a victory in this, in regards to associated party transactions and shareholder loans. Not obviously from our point of view, not really bothered about who won necessarily. It would be City or the Premier League. I think it was interesting that Everton kind of acted as support for City in this, whereas a lot of clubs, Liverpool being one, went well inside the Premier League. But I think the main takeaway on this from our point of view is regards to shareholder loans, isn't it, and what that means for Everton, potentially in the immediate future, and obviously re-emphasises the significance of the takeover, because it looks like, well, I'm going to go too deep into this, the shareholder loans, so effectively loans from looking at Everton's point of view, people like Mashiri are not going to be allowed to be exempt from PSR calculations going forward. And that could potentially be a huge issue for Everton if he was to stay as the owner. Yeah. But thankfully, it looks like he's not going to. So I think from our point of view, it just re-emphasises the importance and the significance of the next couple of months and the Freaking Group taking over.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right takeaway here. I think if Everton weren't in a takeover process and weren't as far down the line with the takeover process as they are, then I think there would be a bit more cause for concern. We don't yet know what those new rules would look like. They would have to be rewritten. They'd have to be rubber stamped by the clubs. Remember that in the Premier League, for anything to get passed, you don't need a majority of 11. You need a majority of 14 to get things over the line. So given that some clubs are in Manchester City's camp here, including Everton, would all of those clubs agree to whatever comes next? Ironically, by the way, Premier League clubs, upon the inception of PSR rulings, as they are now, had a vote on whether shareholder loans should be exempt from calculations and voted 19-1 that they should be exempt. Manchester City, I believe, were part of the group that felt they should be exempt at the time. But maybe they've had an epiphany since and changed their mind. I don't know. Or maybe that's just self-interest. The big thing, the big key pillar across every aspect of Everton, whether it's the financial side or the football side, is obviously the takeover. And should the takeover be completed, and hopefully before the end of the year, then in theory that shareholder debt, those shareholder loans from Mashiri, are wiped out and wouldn't be part of the club moving forward anyway. That's the kind of hugely preferential situation here, isn't it? It might make owners in future, if something were to come into the rules, and certainly around PSR, then it might make owners think differently about how they invest in their clubs in future, and what form that takes, whether it's loans or equity or whatever else. Might make, let's say, for argument's sake, the Freakins think about how they diverted funds into Everton, plowed funds into Everton. But I think this is probably less of an issue than people initially thought when the news came out, and would only be an issue really should Moshiri stay at Everton. I think we're all hoping the takeover gets approved and that chapter's behind us. I mean, we have had what are classed as very small incremental developments on the takeover front, haven't we, over the past few weeks, with an ongoing process in New York courts around Leadenhall wanting to see Leadenhall. So they're the ones that are effectively suing 777 partners and their proxies ACAP in US court. Leadenhall wanting to see the deal under terms of non-disclosure between Everton and ACAP and to kind of pour over the minutiae of that. ACAP granting them access to that information. So that's moving forward very, very slowly, even though Leadenhall have said they've got some concerns. And even just, I think it was October the 2nd, but came to light early this week. We've had confirmation on Companies House of the vehicles the Freakins are going to use to invest in Everton should the takeover be approved. So you've got, is it Roundhouse Capital Holdings Limited? Oh, we got that right, bit of a mouthful, but Roundhouse Capital Holdings Limited, registered obviously in Texas, but on Companies House now in the UK. You've got Dan Freakin as a person of significant control there, and there's a couple of people from the Freakin group who are listed as being part of that company there. And then interestingly, it's owned by Toffee Investments Limited, which is again Freakin owned. So you can start to see the structures that are in place for them to complete and indeed invest in Everton. I get the sense that so far we actually haven't really had any major developments here. We've not got to the point where Leadenhall have said yes or no. We've not got to the point where the club, to the court, have said yes or no. I still think there's a bit of confidence that or another workaround would be found, and that the Freakins will be Everton's new owners. But obviously, we have to have that officially signed off and formally signed off. At the same time, you have the Premier League approvals process. They obviously have to Freakins have to pass the owners and directors test. And I think work continues in the background on what their version of Everton would look like. I mean, I wrote a few weeks ago that one of the things they would do, and I think I mentioned it on this podcast, one of the things that they want to do is they want to look at the hierarchy at Everton, and particularly the board, which was an interim board, and look at how they can improve that, add to that, or change that, whatever it may be. These are the things they can do during that period, but they're actually limited in their scope around the actual changes they can make while they're still in this current period. So yeah, we've not really overcome any of the big hurdles yet, but I think there is a bit of confidence, and obviously should that takeover be waved through as expected, it would remove another problem in the form of Farhad Moshiri and his shareholder loans, which could be included in PSR calculations. Otherwise, just another reason for Everton fans to want this to happen, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the conversation we'd be having if this agreement with the Freakins wasn't reached at this point. It would be, a much bleaker one, I think it'd be fair to say. But yeah, it just feels like, there are things to sort out, but the things that you've said there in regards to the vehicle being set up, I believe as well that there's been some meetings put in with current Everton staff, with potential Freakin representatives to, further down the line for them to meet as well effectively. So it feels like that if there wasn't supreme confidence in this being done, then these things wouldn't be getting done as well.
Frankly, it was put to me that they wouldn't have gone all in on the statement and everything else if they didn't think this was going to happen.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But yeah, I think as Blues we will be cautious, won't we, all the time. But we'll wrap it up there, mate. Anyway, thanks very much to everyone for listening. Just a reminder, do leave us a rating and a review if you're listening to us on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else. If you're watching us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about Andy Gordon, about Dom's penalty or non-penalty, or the City Premier League ruling as well. And just a reminder as well, you want to sponsor Mark Mosey for his Goodison Sleep Out this week, do so for a really good cause. The link will be in the description on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. And yeah, do make sure you pop into the Bridewell if you're in town during the international break and get some great respite from the Blues before we come back against Ipswich next week. We'll be back next Tuesday as usual to reflect on the international break and looking for other topics to discuss as well. So if there's anything else you want us to get stuck into from Everton start of the season or anything else, obviously during the last one we look back at James and his time in Everton, didn't we? You want us to indulge in any kind of nostalgia, do let us know as well. But yeah, that's it from the Everton Byline this week. Cheers to Paddy as ever. Up the toppies, and we'll catch you again soon.